Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cosmic Convention, the Pickles Parker Podcast where we talk about the greatest show in the galaxy, Doctor Who. Now today I'm joined with a special guest yet again. I'm joined today by Richard Lloyd. Say hello, Richard.
Hello everybody, hi.
Yeah, now for those who don't know, Richard is a Doctor Who YouTuber who's quite popular and I've been watching your videos, Richard, for quite a while now, but you've certainly blown up, I'd say, in the past year or so. I kind of noticed that you've had a lot of increase in subscribers recently, which is great.
That's very kind of you, thank you.
Yeah, I guess
Awesome.
your content kind of appeals to people a lot, because you do a lot of variety of different content as well, like the sort of stuff that a lot of other Doctor Who YouTube channels don't do, because obviously you've done like the history of Doctor Who videos and the best of Doctor Who series in the past, and obviously you make like video essays and just a variety of different like things that a lot of other channels don't necessarily do. So I guess that's kind of why people are drawn to your channel. But yeah, I love your videos, Richard, and it's great having you on.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. So I guess I'll just start the podcast how I usually start it, with a guest. So how did your channel come about?
That's a good question. I suppose because I made it back in about May or June of 2014. It was fairly hot off the heels of me having. I was very lucky to go to the set of Doctor Who. I met Capaldi and Mark Gatiss, and that kind of on the set of Robot of Sherwood, and that sort of inspired me, I suppose, to start putting stuff out there. I'd done sort of figure adventure things before, but I don't think I've done any animated ones, just like static photos. And so I was about to release a new series of animations, and so I thought, get them on YouTube. But the type of video I do, I suppose, has changed a lot since then. But that's how it began, really, with figure adventures, I suppose. Amateur figure adventures.
Your content has certainly changed. I guess when you look at your channel, you've kind of done it all, really. Like, you obviously did figure adventures, you've done top tens and reviews and video essays and a lot of different stuff, which I guess is always good, because obviously you've done a variety of different content. You've never really stuck to one thing. You've had a crack at all of it, which is great, and I certainly think you're one of the most varied Doctor YouTubers out there, really, in terms of the content you make as well. So obviously, your content has kind of evolved. Was that a conscious decision to maybe change the content, or was it just kind of naturally, just kind of as you grew older, you kind of changed the kind of content you wanted to make, or was it kind of a conscious decision that you wanted to move away from certain content?
I think it is that thing of as you get older, because I'm a university student now, and so I think been thinking about it recently, I suppose, to myself, is that the way I kind of interact with and engage with Doctor Who has sort of changed over my teenage years, I suppose, and then up to now, and just the way you look at the show and the kind of content you want to do. Because I was thinking, and it was sort of the Capaldi era, really, from kind of 2014, 15, 16, 17. That was when I started engaging with the show in a slightly different way, and I started putting stuff on YouTube, as I've said, and doing figure adventures and reviews and stuff. And I think it is that thing, and also of not ever wanting to kind of stand still, always wanting to just try different things, and never wanting to kind of stay too involved in one particular thing for ever getting repetitive or boring or dull or whatever, for me and for the people watching it, I suppose.
It's certainly interesting what you said about like you starting with the kind of Capaldi era in terms of making YouTube videos. Cause I feel like that kind of era is when Doctor YouTube really blew up. Because there are like a few channels that kind of existed before. I spoke to Mr. TARDIS last week, and obviously he was someone who was doing it before that. But I feel like when Doctor Who YouTube really became big was during that Capaldi era, when a lot of channels started to pop up, including yourself. And yeah, I don't know if it was the era itself or just kind of like the time when they were coming out. Obviously, technology was improving and YouTube became more popular in that time. So I don't know if it's the Capaldi era in general or just the years that it was coming out.
That is a good point, actually. Yeah, really, that's right. And I think as well, because as you say, there's technology improving, I suppose, and like everyone getting phones and stuff, and the kind of ability to make videos becoming, and the ease of which you can access that technology becoming increasingly easier. And I think it's also interesting to look at that alongside stuff like the fan show, which came out, I think, 2015, which sort of encouraged that, I suppose, as well. And also just the fact that like the people that had grown up watching the show when it returned in like 2005 and whatever, the RTD era, I suppose if they were kids then and they'd sort of grown up and that they were starting to look at the show in a different way perhaps and want to put stuff online. Yes, and that's an interesting point, that it kind of coincided with the Capaldi era. Absolutely.
Because obviously like in terms of fandom at the moment, a lot of people, it's kind of changed in a good sense and a bad sense since kind of the Jodie Whittaker era. I think a lot of people like to focus on like how fandom has changed during the Jodie Whittaker era, but I'd kind of argue that it's actually evolved the most throughout the Capaldi era, really, because I wasn't around on social media at the time in terms of like 2013-14, but I imagine if you look at kind of fandom in the Smith era, like towards the end of the Smith era compared to towards the end of the Capaldi era, I imagine it's a completely different landscape.
Yeah, I think as well in sort of the Moffat era in general, it is that thing of like technology and social media becoming more popular and stuff, and like it becomes increasingly sort of available and what am I trying to say? It's like you, with all these social media accounts and stuff, you can very easily put out your views on a Doctor episode, positive or negative, and get an audience very easily, I think, as well. And so, I think there are certainly constants that have run throughout the whole of Doctor Who's history in terms of fandom always being critical and liking to criticize the show and stuff like that. But it's definitely becoming easier to kind of get your voice heard, whether as you say, it's had positive and negative effects, I think.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting what you said about kind of fandom always kind of having that negative thing, because the season 14 Blu-ray box set came out a couple of months ago now, and I was watching through it, and I was watching the Deadly Assassin documentary, and they spoke about how there was like fan uproar about the Deadly Assassin, which I kind of found quite funny, because obviously that's kind of mirroring now, and it's a weird situation to think about, like in the 70s, how fandom would have been like compared to now, because obviously it's so easy to go onto social media and voice your opinion, either a positive opinion or a negative opinion. But obviously back then, like it must have been such a weird experience, I guess, to be a Doctor Who fan and to voice your opinion. And I suppose in a sense we're lucky that we have social media. I know obviously even fairly recently, I'm not going to go into it too much, but there has kind of been some instances of negative things happening within the fandom from certain people. But I think sometimes if we just kind of step back and kind of appreciate like the social media and how it's kind of connected us as Doctor Who fans, and exactly, I wouldn't be doing this podcast with you today if it wasn't for social media and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
So, while it has had negative effects, it has actually brought the fandom closer together, I'd say.
No, I'd agree with you that definitely. I mean, I kind of often think now, like subscribers to my videos or followers on Twitter or whatever, like I wouldn't be able to connect with them if it wasn't for technology and stuff, and like I don't know a thing about their lives and they don't really know a thing about my lives, but like we're able to bond over Doctor Who, which is quite nice. In spite of all that, Yeah,
I guess that's the great thing about Doctor Who, is that it brings people together, and I think that's certainly the great part about any era. Like although there's a lot of controversy at the moment, like certainly Doctor Who is still such a great vehicle of bringing people together. And I often think that regardless of what people might think about the show or its quality, that the fans will always be there, and there'll always be a fandom there because.
Yeah.
I find it interesting
definitely.
that obviously a lot of people talk about the viewership going down and kind of fans leaving, but I find it interesting that throughout the Capaldi era and the Jodie Whittaker era, that are probably the two most controversial eras of the revival, kind of sparks. How do I word this? Kind of like has kind of sparked the fandom in terms of more people jumping onto YouTube, as we mentioned, and kind of that rise in social media and fans connecting. So, regardless of what people might say about the show now, essentially it has brought more people together. So I think it's kind of a weird thing in a sense that even though some people say that these more controversial eras kind of make fans leave in the same way that in the 80s some fans kind of stopped watching with Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy as it got more controversial. But I find it interesting that actually it has brought the fandom closer together in a more controversial time, which I suppose is quite interesting. I guess in a sense that probably the reason there's more YouTube channels and social media accounts in this controversial time is that because it's kind of controversial and there's a lot more different opinions on things, that obviously there are a lot of people who feel like they can voice their opinion, and perhaps their opinion is going to be unique to someone else's, which I guess is one added thing. As much as I'd kind of like Doctor Who to be less controversial in terms of the fact that I'd like it to be more consistent, at least in my opinion, in terms of its episode quality. I think it's certainly great that because of the differentiation of opinion, it has spawned an increase in the fandom and people emerging within it, such as yourself. And yeah, it's obviously everything is a double-edged sword, but I think that in terms of social media and YouTube, I think more people getting involved and reconnecting is always a good thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the thing is that, it always has been controversial to a certain extent, and it always will be. And I guess whether you're praising the show or not, at the end of the day, you're engaging with it. And as long as people are engaging with Doctor Who, whether they're saying really positive things or really negative things or anything in between, as long as that doesn't become overwhelmingly negative, and I don't think it is really at the moment. I mean, people say Time as Children is really controversial, but I guess it is, but at the same time, I don't think the show's in any trouble because of it. And I think it was great to have that episode as sort of the last one before the Christmas special this year, with all those months in between, because it just gives fans all those months, all that time to sort of digest it and to argue over it. And as this happened, it's inevitable. And so, and it's interesting as well, the parallels to the Deadly Assassin, as you say. That season 14 Blu-ray could not have come at a better time, I think.
It is quite convenient how that came out. I guess it's interesting what you said. I wasn't the biggest fan of the Timeless Child, but it's certainly interesting what you said, and I'd agree that it did leave people talking for months, and obviously the discussion was very big, and got the fandom talking again. I guess if there's one thing that I think everyone can congratulate Series 12 on, it's that it got the fandom more active and talking again after, I suppose, Series 11, I guess maybe more to do, at least in my opinion, I kind of found Series 11 slightly bland. I guess because of that, there wasn't really much, I guess, you could discuss about Series 11. But with Series 12, there's so many potential talking points that it's kind of reinvigorated the fandom after the year off. And I think regardless of what anyone thinks about Series 12, I think we can congratulate it on that, because for me personally, after Series 11, I kind of went a bit off Doctor Who, and obviously it was because a lot of other things I liked were kind of happening at the time, but I still like Doctor Who, but it wasn't like at the forefront of my brain throughout probably most of last year. So I kind of wasn't too bothered about watching it when it came back. I obviously wanted to watch it, but in the run up to Series 11, I was watching every trailer, trying to digest every bit of information. And for Series 12, I was just like, if I see the trailer on Twitter, I'll watch it. But I wasn't too bothered. And then I watched Spyfall, and it was almost immediately reinvigorated my interest into the show after that year had kind of not necessarily turned me off Doctor Who, because I still liked it, but just kind of my mind had wandered to other things. And then as soon as Spyfall came on, I just became a Doctor Who obsessive again, which is something I can certainly congratulate Series 12 on, and I owe Series 12 for kind of reinvigorating my interest in Doctor Who, because after Series 11, as I said, I kind of went off Doctor Who a bit. And in terms of my channel, I think after my Resolution review, I didn't make another Doctor Who review, or just a Doctor Who video in general, until my Spyfall review. But obviously after Series 12, I've been making a load of Doctor Who videos, so like my interest is certainly come back, and I've been watching a lot of the classic series now, and just all this stuff. I think Series 12 has certainly reinvigorated the fandom.
Yeah, I would agree that there's definitely been more to talk about with this series. I mean, with the big things like Spyfall and the Ruth Doctor reveal, Fugitive Doctor in Fugitive of the Jadoon, and then the Timeless Children as well. Those kind of three big points. I mean, I remember watching Spyfall myself, and personally, I don't mind Series 11. I quite have a soft spot for it, but nevertheless, I totally get what you're saying about how after that episode, that cliffhanger, it just blew me away. It was something else. I was totally not expecting it, and that was, for me, that was the kind of the most exciting reveal of Series 12, even though it was right at the beginning and before all the mad stuff happened afterwards. Because just at the time, following the fairly self-contained, simple back to basics Series 11, you had no idea that Chibnall had that up his sleeve to bring the Master back, and just the way it was done, it was fantastic. That has a real place in my heart, that reveal. I don't know. I mean, definitely those three things from Series 12 are the talking points. Now, as you say, I suppose to the Timeless Children's credit, it has given us more to talk about in these months than perhaps the Battle of Ranskorav Kolos did.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I certainly agree with you because a lot of people said that they kind of saw it coming because it had been leaked, but because I kind of wasn't really looking at Doctor Who theories, because I kind of gone off the show, I had no idea that Sash Dhawan was going to be revealed to be the Master, and it was a complete surprise because obviously after John Sim, it took until Capaldi for them to reintroduce the Master. Like he just wasn't, or the character of the Master just wasn't around during Matt Smith's run. So I kind of presumed they'd take a similar break with Whittaker, especially after the arc with Missy. I presume they kind of leave that for a little bit, but it only took one series for the Master to be back. And I didn't expect it, but I'm so glad he is back because I love Sash Dhawan in the part.
I sometimes wonder about that. If Chibnall, when he got the job, he was like really keen to do a Master thing, Master story, Master storyline, and he was like, "Oh drat, Stephen Moffat's just done that in the previous season, so I'm gonna have to wait a year." But no, it's interesting as you say about that. Definitely,
I think as well, something I can certainly say about Series 12 is I think the villains were a massive improvement. Obviously, the big returning villain in Series 11 was Tim Shaw, which he's not a great villain. I think he works for the Woman Who Fell to Earth, but I don't think he's a strong enough villain to return.
He's grown on me, to be honest. I think he's quite formidable. I get, he's not got a lot of baggage behind him for like fans to go, like it's the Master, it's the Cybermen. I personally, actually, maybe controversially, I'd say that between him and like Ashad from Series 12, I don't really see much difference apart from like what's on the surface. Like if Tim Shaw was Ashad, or like if they swap places. I don't know. That's maybe going down a bit of a rabbit hole. But yeah, no, I totally get why. Yeah, obviously in Series 12, it made sense to bring back the Master, and Ashad was a pretty decent new Cyberman villain as well. And having a returning character like that, it as I say, it brings all that baggage, and I think that's what's so exciting for me about the Master, because it was just Sacha Dhawan, and to all intents and purposes, it could have just been a new villain, a new character. I mean, it's a new incarnation, but the fact that it was the Master is what really made that just so exciting.
Yeah, that's a good point you made, actually, about kind of Tim Shaw being quite similar to Ashad. Because, maybe it's because, controversially, I wasn't the biggest fan of Ashad, mainly because he was kind of very similar to your kind of stereotypical villain like Tim Shaw was. And I don't mind Tim Shaw. It's kind of like if in Series 5 the big returning villain was just Prisoner Zero. Like, Prisoner Zero works for the 11th hour, but I don't think that character would have been great for a finale. And I understand why they did it in the Battle of Ranskorav Kolos, because they didn't have an arc, so they wanted a returning link, and obviously Tim Shaw was kind of the only real option they had there.
Yeah, well, it had to be self-contained, I suppose, and I think it's sort of what I think in hindsight it works more than at the time, because at the time we'd had those 9 weeks of episodes in Series 11, and then it got to the Battle of Ranskorav Kolos, and they were trying to keep it a secret that Tim Shaw was back, but we all guessed, everyone knew, it was the only option. And I suppose on the one hand, I quite like that, because it's something we've not really seen, I don't think, ever in the new series. We've perhaps seen it a few times in the classic series, where you've got the same villain bookending the series at both ends, in the first story and the last story, which I quite like. I quite like that parallel between them. And obviously we've had the same thing in Series 12 with the Master. So it kind of begs the question when we get to Series 13, if we just take a look at the first episode and the villain in that episode, we can kind of bank on them returning at the end of the series. I think that seems to be the formula that Chibnall's gone for. But I don't know. I suppose that sort of invites the wider question of the thing I was saying about Tim Shaw and Ashad, because I sort of agree with you that Ashad, I don't know, I think at the time I was a bit more excited about him than I am now, because I recently rewatched those stories, and I kind of thought, okay, he's all right, but perhaps not as amazing as everyone says he is. And there's that sort of slightly ethical question, I suppose. Just because this villain is a Cyberman, just because it's the Master, should we care more than if it's Tim Shaw or whoever it is? I don't know. I think inevitably the fans always will get more excited. I mean, because of all the baggage, of course, they'll get more excited about one of those guys. But I don't know. I think the fandom can sometimes be a bit, and Doctor Who fans can be a bit harsh on one-off villains like that sometimes. I mean, I don't know. If I was in Chris Chibnall's boots, I can understand why he did what he did with Tim Shaw, and but I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a good point about returning villains. I guess even if you take it back to the classic series, would more people like Terror of the Vervoids if it was with the Krynoids and not the Vervoids? I think there's certainly a stigma about returning villains that just make people like a story a bit more, and I guess I kind of...
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Yeah, because it's always like the Daleks, the Cybermen, or the Master, and quite often in the new series, the Cybermen and the Master at the same time. We've had that in about 3 finales now, I think. And so it is sort of going around and around in circles a bit, and I suppose it's inevitable on the one hand, but I don't know. I mean, will there ever be another kind of villain to match those 3? I mean, we've sort of had things like the Weeping Angels, but they're more of a monster, I suppose, in terms of kind of classic Doctor Who monsters and villains, and they were invented 13 years ago. So I guess at this stage it's difficult to sort of come up with something as formidable as the Daleks, the Cybermen, as the Master, and as much of a classic as them. But it's interesting. I don't know if they could do that or not. I think fans would be too harsh if ever they tried to create a new baddie like that to match them. I don't think we'd go for it. Which is a bit sad.
It's interesting what you say about the Weeping Angels, because of the time I got into Doctor Who, because I was about 7. I got into it around Series 6 time, so for me, the Weeping Angels and the Silence were kind of almost like as big villains as the Daleks and Cybermen, because they were kind of they were marketed a lot, because I used to buy Doctor Adventures, and those were like the 4 they always used to advertise as the villains. So to me, when I was younger, it was like those are the 4. And it was only really as I got older that I really realised that the Weeping Angels and the Silence especially really aren't in the same league. And I think the Weeping Angels were at a point in terms of them being a big returning villain, but not really since the Smith era have the Angels even had a story, really. So their kind of time in the spotlight is kind of over, I guess.
Mm-hmm. No, I'd agree there. I think bringing them back now or any time in the future, really, I don't think that would work, to be honest. I think they've had their day, the Angels, and the same for the Silence, I suppose, because they were so integral to the 11th Doctor's era. But I absolutely agree that, like, as a kid, they were marketed as being just as bad, those two. And it's sort of a shame that, I don't know, that they've given up on doing that now. I mean, maybe the Stenza might have gone down a bit better if there'd been more than one of them. If we'd seen Tim Shaw with a whole army of them, that would have been quite cool. I think the design itself, the face in particular, is really formidable. The suit's a bit generic. And the whole thing with the teeth. But it's a shame that there hasn't been another classic baddie like that, I suppose, in recent years. I mean, I think the Silence was pretty much the last one, and that was like a decade ago.
Jesus Christ, you're right.
I don't know what that says about Doctor Who or Doctor Who fans.
I think with the Silence, I think because they're so tied to that Silence Will Fall arc, it makes it a bit hard to bring them back. But I think there is like a lot of different things you could do with them, kind of disconnecting them from that arc, like just in the way that if you look away you forget them, that kind of, I think a really cool idea was if like a murder mystery which the Silence were involved in, and kind of everyone involved in the murder has completely forgotten because the Silence were involved in, kind of building on that scene in Day of the Moon where that guy lost years of his life to the Silence, that the owner of the children's home. I feel like there's kind of a lot of untapped potential with the Silence that they never really used so much because they were so tied to that arc.
And now you say that, absolutely. I'd actually completely forgotten the thing about how you forget them when you look away. That's how much I've forgotten. I must go back to those episodes when the Series 6 Steelbook comes out in a week or two. But that's interesting. I think that there probably is a lot of untapped potential with them, because they were really big in that first Series 6 story. That was so exciting at the time, and they were marketed as being this massive baddie. And then they crop up again in the Wedding of River Song, and they're sort of in the background a bit more, and then the time with the Doctor, they're in the background even more. It's a bit of a shame, I suppose, that they haven't. I think, to be honest, personally, I think they're tied too much to that arc for them to bring them. I think it would make it very difficult, but it's a shame. It's a shame they didn't crop up in Series 7 a bit more. Maybe that would have been cool.
I don't know whether they would have, because I think the thing is with Series 7, it feels very reactionary. That because a lot of people thought Series 6 the arc was too intertwined, Moffat kind of ditched the arc for most of Series 7, and only in the Name of the Doctor and then obviously Day and Time does he actually return to that arc. He kind of just leaves it, and I kind of imagine what Series 7 would have been like if he didn't kind of bow to the backlash of Series 6. And I think we probably would have got, although I really like Time of the Doctor, but in terms of like the resolutions to like what Trenzalore and how it's linked to the Silence, and particularly I don't mind the explanation of they travelled back in time and created River. I think that makes perfect sense and try and kill the Doctor. But I think the exploding TARDIS thing, it just brings up the question of how did the Silence blow up the TARDIS? I still don't really understand how they'd have the power to do that, and obviously it doesn't get explained because there isn't enough time. something I only found out recently. Sorry, that Matt Smith was originally Moffat thought he would stay on for Series 8, and obviously he didn't. So I believe Moffat presumed he would have a lot more time to kind of carry out the arc, which he obviously didn't, so he had to tie it up in Time of the Doctor. I never really thought about that because, to me, and especially when I was younger, so I guess that kind of imprint has kind of been left on me, that Series 8 feels very different to kind of the Smith era. Which I guess for me, it's why when someone says, what's your thought on the Moffat era? I kind of have to split it into the Smith era and the Capaldi era, because to me, although it's still Moffat at the helm, they feel very different. Like, Series 8 in particular, it feels so much more darker, and even the music and Clara feels like a different character, and it certainly would have been interesting to see Smith in that environment, but it almost actually, when you think about it, I think a lot of the ideas explored with Capaldi in Series 8 probably would have worked better with a pre-established Doctor, because for me personally, I mean, I'm not a big Series 8 fan, and I think in particular kind of the characterization of the Doctor and Clara, I'm not really a big fan of, but I think if you put Smith in that scenario and you have a pre-established Doctor there, I think kind of the fracturing between the Doctor and Clara would, at least for me, work so much better, because it kind of seems for me in Series 8 that Clara dislikes the 12th Doctor throughout all of that series, and she only really dislikes him because he's changed his face. And I know that probably wasn't the intention, but because it's kind of such a sudden thing that she just dislikes him now and didn't really show anything like that in Series 7, it kind of comes across as she only dislikes him because he's old now. And as I said, that probably wasn't the intention, but I think because you've got this new Doctor there and all of a sudden she dislikes him and all of a sudden he's questioning his morality, and I think it just would have worked a lot better if it was with a pre-established Doctor, because you've seen Clara get on with that Doctor, so her now, like the fracturing between the companions, I think would have just been a bit more believable. But that's just me. But yeah, I think like Moffat certainly should have spent more focusing on that arc instead of kind of ditching it for 7. I think it makes 6 to 7 quite jarring.
Yeah, now I think about it, looking back at Series 7, it is weird how it's just dropped. There's no real nothing, no references or anything, because I suppose the Impossible Girl thing is the only arc that you get instead. I mean, Series 7A, Part 1 is pretty devoid of anything, apart from Osmond appearing, I suppose. But that is weird, looking back in hindsight, that he didn't do more in Series 7.
Yeah, I guess that even though I'm quite a big fan of the Smith era, I will acknowledge that probably the biggest problem with it is the Moffat, rather than kind of tying up arcs, he just open up more questions. Like, instead of answering who blew up the TARDIS, he just opens up this other arc about River killing the Doctor, and rather than close up that arc, he then opens up the other arc about the Impossible Girl, and although it does somehow tie together in the end, I just think there should have been perhaps a bit more of a commitment to tying up these arcs, because I've been doing a Revive Series marathon recently, and a couple of days ago I watched The Pandora Opens The Big Bang, which I love. It's my favourite Doctor Who story ever, I think. But at the end of that story, it gives you the impression that in the next series you're going to find out who blew up the TARDIS, and you just don't. And I guess it's kind of a bit weird, because it is at the end, the Doctor's like, we've solved everything, but who blew up the TARDIS? We don't know that still, so wait until next series to find out. And then in the next series, it's just never mentioned at all. And then obviously, the Trenzalore thing at the end of Series 6, and Doctor Who, that is not mentioned again until the last episode of Series 7. So Moffat certainly made you wait to get those answers.
Yeah, I guess that brings back memories, actually, because when I watched The Big Bang for the first time, I remember thinking that the throwaway line right at the end that became the inspiration for Mummy on the Orient Express, I always thought that was going to be like the plot of the Christmas special, which is just bonkers looking back now, because it was never ever going to be that.
No.
But yeah, now you say that actually about the Doctor Who question mark thing not coming up. I mean, there's a bit of that in Series 7. I mean, with the Asylum of the Daleks, obviously that story ends with the Daleks kind of going Doctor Who. I suppose, thinking about it, the thing he was going for was, we're going into the 50th anniversary year and bringing back more mystery to the Doctor, and that sort of ties in to that silence arc a bit, I guess, because he wants to go out the shadows a bit after faking his death and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. I think, to be honest, as much as I love Clara, I think the arrival of the departure of the Ponds and the arrival of Clara, that's sort of the point where it kind of takes a new turn, and then before you know it, they're back to the silent stuff again in the time of the Doctor. It would have been nice, definitely, to have a bit more time, I suppose, in Series 7B, a full season of Clara, maybe.
So I think what they should have done is have Amy and Rory leaving the God Complex, and that's kind of their ending. And they return for the wedding of River Song, but they don't become companions. They've left at the end of the God Complex. That's their actual ending. And they come back in that alternate world in the wedding of River Song, and kind of the last scene you see of them is them being told that the Doctor is still alive and out there, and they're all kind of happy, but they don't really see him again. And then in Series 7, you have a whole series of Clara, which I think would have just improved that relationship, because Series 7 is such a weird series, because both halves, they just feel completely different to each other. So it's really hard to kind of consider it as one series to me.
No, you're right, it's a funny one. Yeah.
It almost seems a bit pointless how they kind of completely redesigned it for 7B, new costume, new companion, new TARDIS, new title sequence.
Yeah, lots of changes between the two.
For just half a series, and it kind of felt very weird. Because I kind of presumed at the time that title sequence would be staying on for Capaldi, but just with his face in it.
Right,
obviously that never happened. They got a completely new title sequence. So it all seems very weird, that redesign. I do like it. The timing
of all that was strange. You're right. I guess one of the things that threw a spanner in the works with that was the 50th anniversary. And on the one hand, of having to sort of rearrange the episodes and episode count and stuff because of the budget, and wanting to have, they started splitting the series, of course, and there was 6 and 7, and so I suppose you get that sort of influence coming in, and wanting to have a new thing with Clara, a new companion, and I suppose that there was a lot going on there, and a lot of new stuff definitely coming in, and before any of the old stuff really got tied up, definitely.
It is very weirdly structured, and I think that's why Series 7 is such an enigma among series, is just because it doesn't really feel like one series, and it certainly feels like Moffat obviously had a lot on his plate, and I think that's probably why Series 7 feels so different. But I guess one positive is because of that, it's probably one of the most varied series in terms of stories and in terms of elements. I guess it's a lot more varied.
Yeah, definitely, actually. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. It's interesting about you saying, Rory could have left in Series 6. That would have been quite nice, maybe, if they'd known the Doctor was still alive, but never actually saw him again, or saw him again episodes later, many episodes later. Because I suppose Series 7 Part 1 is sort of the equivalent of the RTD specials.
Yes.
It's like a last hurrah for Amy and Rory, but they've sort of already had their time. There's nothing really that's new to do with them. We get that horrible arc with the divorce thing that lasts an episode. I don't know what I was thinking there.
So
and
strange. It's only in one episode.
I guess he just did that because there wasn't really anything else to do to create drama between them. But I suppose there are seeds of things there. Like, I quite like the thing of how they, after each adventure, they sort of say to the Doctor, "Oh, can we go home now?" Well, I say that on the one hand it's nice, on the other hand it gets a bit bitty, because they're like, they're never staying there for any length of time. They're always going back. But that's quite nice as a sort of thing of foreshadowing them wanting to leave the Docks. I quite like that little arc, actually. That there is that there, which sort of culminates in the power of 3, I suppose. And then I suppose before they can leave the Docks voluntarily, they end up dying and paying the price. Yeah, and of course Brian Williams as well. If there wasn't Series 7A, we wouldn't have got him. So
that's very true.
Yeah, got to love that character. It's interesting as well, actually, to maybe link it back to the current stuff as well a bit. How so much of that Series 7A was Chris Chibnall on the surface. True, it seems so, definitely, because it's 2 out of 3 episodes, and I reckon. I think Brian Williams was a Chibnall creation, probably. I don't think Moffat came up with that.
No, it was a Chibnall
obviously, we'd never seen him before, had we? And we never saw him. Well, I suppose we wouldn't have seen him again, but he wasn't at the wedding or anything in Series 5. And and that's interesting as well, because then that's before, in 2018, an actual granddad became a full-time companion in the form of Graham. So Chibnall clearly wanted to do that from 2012, I suppose.
I think you're right about him being a Chibnall creation, because I'm pretty sure the only reason PS came around is because Chibnall was speaking to Moffat, and he realised there wasn't any closure for Brian, so Chibnall wrote it. So definitely,
absolutely.
I think
you're right.
Either Brian was a Chibnall creation, or Chibnall was the only one who actually cared about that character. One of the two. But it's weird, because I remember liking Series 7A at the time, and
it was really great, exciting at the time.
But looking back, it feels so weird, because especially as kind of Series 7 was the first series I started from the beginning on broadcast.
Right, of course.
I've got, I kind of explained this in the other podcast, and Mr. Tardos was horrified at the point I started, but I started, my first episode was The Girl Who Waited, and then my first 4 episodes were The Girl Who Waited, The God Complex, Closing Time, and The Wedding of River Song, which obviously there's a lot of returning things in that you kind of have to know about, and it's a very forward point to jump on.
Right.
And a lot of people often say that Series 6 is the worst point to jump on, but obviously I did, and even though I had no idea what was going on in The Wedding of River Song, I still somehow enjoyed it. I guess that's why, because I kind of find it hard to hate Asylum of the Daleks, even though I recognise that it's not really that good, but just because it's kind of the first series opener I watched on broadcast, I always have a bit of a little bit of nostalgia for it, even though I recognise that it's not great, and it's got a load of continuity errors regarding the Daleks, which are just ridiculous. It's kind of, I have that weird situation
at the time they were really exciting. Series 6 and 7, because I was 11, 12, 13, something like that at the time of those series. And I agree that now looking back you can kind of see the flaws a bit more, but I suppose I was won over by it, in Series 7, all the blockbuster stuff and every Dalek ever and all that sort of stuff. And
I love that
Series
at the time.
6 for the arc stuff.
Blockbuster,
it was really good at the time.
Posters, and it just seemed so great. And bizarrely, I even remember having a conversation with my mum saying that I thought it was great that there wasn't a story arc, which is mad to think now, because I think that's one of the big problems with that series. But it is mental to think back of what I thought at the time. And I loved it. I loved Series 7, particularly A at the time, and I have so many memories watching it. But looking back, I think that's the one part of the Smith era that I really think that that there's a lot they could have improved upon there. And Series 7A and B feel like such separate entities, to the point that, as you said, Series 7A is kind of half written by Moffat, half written by Chibnall, and then Series 7B is kind of half written by Moffat, half written by Mark Gatiss, half written by Neil Cross, and then a couple of other writers in there as well.
It's
almost like they were thought of as
2 episodes. That's right. That was weird how that emerged in Series 7, the thing of like, well, there are 3 episodes that 3 writers that have 2 episodes. It's Chris Chibnall in Series 7A, and then there's Mark Gatiss in Series 7B and Neil Cross as well. I've never thought of that actually before, how there are those 3 writers that had 6 episodes between them, which is like half the series. That's It's mad. Yeah, it was a mad time, I think, behind the scenes, and for Moffat, gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, it does feel like they were thought of two separate entities, because obviously if you were going to get a writer to write two stories for a series and that series was split in two, you'd probably say, well, Mark Gatiss can write one story in 7A and one story in 7B, but they didn't go with that. They just kind of, it feels quite weird. I feel like, because obviously no writers who worked on 7A, apart from Stephen Moffat, worked on 7B, it does feel like they were thought of as two separate entities, and I kind of almost wonder if they were kind of written at the same time, which is why you don't get many writers collaborating on both other than the man himself.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think, to be honest, they sort of treated them, to all intents and purposes, as separate seasons.
Yes.
Which is interesting, and I suppose it sort of begs the question about whether seasons should be longer or shorter or whatever, and I don't know. I suppose they were just inheriting that 13-episode format that had been used so far every time, and I guess with the scheduling, that was the main thing that caused the splits for Series 6 and 7, I suppose, and the 5th anniversary again, as I say. There was so much going on, I suppose, so much like converging into Series 7. You had to get rid of the Ponds, introduce Clara, set up the 5th anniversary special. There was all that to do, and Christmas special, sandwiched halfway in between and either end, and guys, bonkers. But I sort of like how in that era you do get sort of shorter mini seasons, I suppose, like Series 6A and B and 7A and B, and although in particular I think Series 6B, it's interesting as you say, I suppose, sorry, that those final 3 episodes, Girl Awaited, God Complex, Closing Time, Wedding of River Song, that's 4 episodes actually, sorry. They are quite arc heavy, I suppose, in a way. But at the same time, I always think of that Series 6B as sort of being like, quite a few random episodes in a sense. Like, the arc thing is really heavy in Series 6A, like almost every episode pretty much contributes to that. I loved that at the time, the whole thing with the eye patch lady. God, that was so exciting. And what was going on with Amy's pregnancy and the Ganger thing as well, and all that sort of stuff. That was, and River Song and the girl and the astronaut, that was all brilliant. And then Series 6B, you get Let's Kill Hitler, which is personally I'd say a bit of a mess.
I'd agree.
And then Night Terrors and Girl Who Waited, which are, I don't know, Girl Who Waited is sort of connected in that it's to do with Amy and Rory's relationship, but in terms of the silent stuff, you get Let's Kill Hitler and then
Closing Time and the Wedding of River Song, really.
Sort of ties into it with the departure of Amy and Rory, but again, now, as you say, so I'd say the most successful time they did that half season thing, I guess, was Series 6A. That's probably my favorite out of all those 4 mini seasons. But it's interesting how they juggled that, and I suppose it sort of, all that experimenting sort of preempted maybe the shorter seasons we get now, and it kind of opens up questions about how much of the series should be story arc, how much of it should be filler, what is the balance. I mean, as I say, I think Series 6A really got that balance right. I mean, there's not an episode there that doesn't, in some minor way even, contain a flash of Eye Patch Lady, Madame Kavarin or whatever, or something. I don't know.
You're right. I'd certainly say Series 6 is did the split series more successfully than Series 7, just because, I don't know, maybe it's because I didn't watch the first part at the time, but I kind of always think of Series 6 as kind of one series, I guess, because both the halves do kind of feel quite similar, whereas with Series 7, I remember, because when I was younger, before I was on Twitter or on YouTube or anything, I used to religiously go onto the Doctor Who website all the time to try and get news and just look at all these things. So I remember on the episode guide, they even had Series 7 listed as Series 7 Part 1 and Series 7 Part 2. They don't anymore.
Right, yes.
Even they had it listed as that. So in my head for years, I always distinguished it as Part 1 and Part 2, or A and B. And it's only very recently that I've kind of, in the last couple of years, that I've kind of considered Series 7 more of one entity. But yeah, I remember at the time, like, it feels so weird because I don't know if you know when people do like build a perfect series where you like get episodes and like what's the best episode 2 or episode 3.
Perfect series sort of thing.
I always find it weird when you start getting to like episode 6 and 7 and you like people start like you see series 7 and you get the Bells of St. John and it's like episode 6, and that feels like I always class that as like an episode 1, and the Rings of Akaten is an episode 2.
The numbering is so messed up there. Like I'm pretty sure Bells of St. John is episode 6, isn't it? But it's episode 7 if you count the snowman, and for years that's confused me. I still don't know. If you named me a series 7B episode, I could not tell you necessarily what number it is, particularly Sirius just said something, sorry. Particularly towards the end. Like, I think I could do that with series 6, but not with series 7, because they are just so disjointed, as you say. It's kind of like you have to have the snowmen in between, because the Bells of St. John makes no sense if you haven't watched the snowmen, so you kind of have to have it in there. That would be funny if you just watched the whole of Doctor Who without the Christmas specials. That would
I'm pretty sure there are some things like Amazon Prime, which always annoyed me, is that they have the Christmas specials under the movie section and not in the actual series itself. So then you're just missing ridiculous chunks, like you go from Name of the Doctor instantly into Deep Breath or Angels Take Manhattan to the Bells of St. John. I was just thinking, if someone was to marathon that, like, they'd just be so confused.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's like, because how Twice Upon a Time is the only story, I think, from the new series that's never been on a box set of anything, like a series box set. And so just imagine watching series 10. I suppose it wouldn't be too confusing, but you'd reach the end of the Doctor Falls, stick on series 11, and it's like, oh, I missed the regeneration. What's happened here? How did that happen? It's interesting, all those times, particularly the Moffat era, I suppose, where you got stories, you got split seasons or whatever, as a product of the circumstances, from series 6 and 7 being split and all that sort of stuff, all the way up to, Twice Upon a Time, which only came into being because of that transition period between him and Chibnall. It's interesting to think about that and all the experiments they've done over the years.
I guess it's quite interesting because as much as a lot of people describe the Christmas specials as kind of throwaway nonsense that you don't really need to watch, when you think about it, most of the Christmas specials are actually pivotal to your understanding of the main series of Doctor Who.
Totally,
the Christmas Invasion you need because it's Tennant's first story, The Runaway Bride. You kind of need to know Donna. You don't really need to watch Voyage of the Damned or The Next Doctor, but then End of Time you obviously need to watch. And again, you don't really need to watch A Christmas Carol or The Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe, but then The Snowmen is really important, and same with Time with the Doctor. And I guess the Capaldi special is probably, I guess, you don't need to watch Husbands of River Song or Last Christmas, but obviously it's better if you do because they have payoffs for certain things. The Danny Pink
the Doctor Clara relationship, and then the payoff for River Song, in Husbands, absolutely.
And obviously, Return of Doctor Mysterio, other than just knowing that the Doctor travels with Nardole now, is kind of very disposable. And then obviously,
I suppose it is.
With Twice Upon a Time, you obviously need to know that. So I think it's quite interesting how much pivotal stuff goes into these specials, despite the fact a lot of people describe them as throwaway.
That's a great point, actually, Anne, because I think they've clearly realised now, however many years on, 15 or whatever, that since the show came back, that they've kind of written themselves into a corner with the whole Christmas special thing. There's only so much you can do with that format, and we've had to have doctors regenerating, the Doctor dying at Christmas, 3 times now, as Moffat said, that analogy about him dying on Christmas Day. And so I think they've recognised that, and with the change to the festive special instead for New Year or whatever, and trying that out, they've sort of thought, okay, let's sort of try and reinvent this slightly, because I guess at the time, and especially in the heyday of the RTD era, the specials were very popular and did very well, and served their purpose there. But they've definitely become increasingly pivotal, I suppose, with the exception of the Christmas Invasion. And as I say, I think it is that thing of like, there are all these formats and formulas that have been built up over New Who so far, and I guess with that example particularly, that they have just thought, what can we do to get out of this corner that we've written ourselves into? Let's change it to a festive special instead. And it's interesting with that, because I suppose some would say that's not been as successful. I mean, with Revolution of the Daleks, there are so many people saying, stick it on Christmas Day, it'll do better in terms of viewing figures, it'll just be better overall. And it's interesting that how sort of there is that belief how the special always has to go on Christmas Day, but it's perfectly possible to have specials that don't, I suppose. I mean, the 2009 specials, I'm very fond of, and I remember being very excited about at the time, even though they're less stories, than a proper season. I don't know. It's a funny one with that. It's a funny one.
I think a Halloween special would be really good. I've always wondered why Doctor Who's never done that, like a kind of full-on scary story, because I imagine particularly in the Moffat era with Moffat at the helm, I'm really surprised he didn't kind of do something with that, because it kind of makes sense, because obviously Doctor Who's kind of synonymous with scaring children, that there was never really a conversation of doing that.
I suppose the only problem with that, though, if it was on the Halloween, a lot of kids would
That's
be...
true. No one would be watching it.
Because we did get that once in 2015, the first half of the Zygon two-parter was on Halloween, wasn't it?
I remember that.
Yeah,
I do. Jesus. I completely forgot about that, but you're absolutely right. It was on Halloween. Yeah, you are correct. If back, especially in the Smith era where I was quite young, if there's a special on Halloween, I'm not watching it that night. I'm just out all night collecting sweets. But,
good for you.
back then, I guess obviously now I'd watch it on Halloween, but if you're primarily targeting towards kids, which I guess Doctor Who mainly is, then actually when you think about it like that, no wonder they haven't had a Halloween special. But I think certainly that kind of inconsistency with how many episodes, when does the series air, when does the special air, is kind of more of a recent thing, I guess. Other than the 2009 specials, series 1 to 5 were kind of very consistent. Like, it was a 13 episode series with a Christmas special, and it aired in the spring. And then obviously series 6 onwards, it all got a bit like Doctor Who, sometimes in the spring, sometimes in autumn, sometimes it's 13 episodes, sometimes it's 12, sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's split in half, sometimes a Christmas special or a New Year's special, who knows really. Like, there's not that level of consistency there, but I guess in a sense it's more consistency in some ways than the classic series ever had, because looking at, like, particularly the Hartnell era and the amount of stories there, it's just like how, like, there is no consistency for how many stories there are in a series. It's just what they felt like it. Obviously when you get into like the Pertwee and Baker era and Peter Davison, there's more of a consistency there, but certainly in the 60s it was just like whatever stories they felt like it, there wasn't a limit to how many stories they put in a series. It's just like
and I think nowadays as well, there's definitely that stigma of we all know that the seasons have been getting shorter. I don't think by design really, but just because obviously the budget has a massive impact on that as well. I mean, I think something that people overlook with the Chibnall seasons is that it's just more common for shows to have 10 episode seasons these days than 12 or 13. I mean, at one time, I think the 13 episode season thing was pretty popular and widespread back in the RTD sort of era, with other shows as well, and so it made sense at that time for Doctor Who to adopt that format and formula. And it's interesting, that balance, as you say, between what's the series, what's the special, and obviously, as I say, the budget plays into that as well, and how they're kind of balancing things around. I don't know what the perfect balance is, really, because on the one hand, I think there are a lot of people that wouldn't want Doctor Who to be just one-off specials in the vein of like Sherlock or films, basically like movies and stuff, because Doctor Who's whole thing is that it isn't cinema, it isn't film. So I don't know, and I think it's definitely going to be interesting in the future to see what they do with it. I mean, I guess maybe after Whittaker leaves one day or Chibnall or whatever, they'll reinvent it again in terms of like the episode number count, and I don't know what they'll do, but maybe we are just heading towards shorter and shorter seasons, and it'd be interesting to see if they do more stuff that's arc heavy again in the future. If they wanted to try and go down that sort of Netflix binge watching route, which they haven't. I don't know, they haven't quite pushed that for a while, because Series 12 had elements of it, as we were saying at the start of the conversation. Those three big things, but there are also episodes as well, I suppose, that in Series 12 definitely that didn't contribute to the story arc at all. And so I guess they always are all trying to strike this balance, between filler episodes and story arc episodes and special episodes and series episodes, and I don't know what the perfect formula is. I've got no clue.
Because I don't know whether Doctor Who's better in the spring or the autumn or whatever. I don't know.
I think personally, for me on that question, it works so much better in terms of atmosphere in the autumn. I can see why they've done it in the spring in the past, but my real bugbear about it being in the spring is that, okay, on the one hand, it feels nice and fresh to have a new series in the new spring of the year, but then by the time you get to episode 10, 11, 12, the summer sun is coming through the window, shining onto the television screen. I remember instances of that, like in Series 10, even with episode 8, The Lie of the Land. That was a problem for me. I was watching it in a room that didn't have any blinds, and the sun was just reflecting on the screen. I could barely see what on earth was happening in that story. And same for things like The Eaters of Light as well. I think Doctor Who definitely suits the autumn more personally. But then I don't know, because again, I'm not sure whether the viewing figures would necessarily support that view. Then I suppose in both cases they've fallen slightly, I guess, because Series 10 didn't do that much better than Series 9, and everyone said, Series 9 did badly because it was in the autumn.
But then Series 8 was in the autumn and got reasonably...
And Series 8. No, so, true. Yeah.
I'd be interested...
We've got that thing at the moment, haven't we, of how... What is it? Is it like 18-month gaps between series at the moment, roughly? Because we had, autumn 2018, then... wintry spring of 2020, and then before COVID, I think the projected time for Series 13 was going to be like back to the autumn again, like autumn 2021, I guess. Doubt they'll still make that date, but it's interesting how it moves about in the schedules and the seasons.
I'd be interested actually to check out the individual viewing figures of Series 6 and in the two halves to kind of really wonder if it did better in the spring or in the autumn. Because with that series, it airs in both.
I don't know off the top of my head. That's right.
I don't know, but I'd be interested to see if A did better or Part B did better. I guess for me, it's kind of weird because although I started watching it when it aired in the autumn, I guess I kind of like when it's in the spring, because like you said, it's fresh. I feel quite fresh. It's just a nice time of year, and I don't know, I'm not against it being in the autumn. I can certainly understand what you say about like atmosphere and things, but yeah, I don't know, maybe I slightly prefer it in the spring. I can't really explain why, but yeah, I don't really mind when it's on, but I think it would be nice to kind of get a more consistent kind of time of when it airs, I guess. I just think maybe for the general public, I don't know if it would help the viewing figures if Doctor Who was on like a consistent time of year consistently, so people would always know it's on at that time of year. I have no idea. But
I mean, to be honest, I think most things these days are fairly inconsistent. Like if you take, I don't know, Broadchurch, for example, which had 2-year gaps between seasons. Same with stuff like Sherlock as well, a 2-year gap plus, and like each time for both those shows, I think each season was on in a slightly different month to the last one. And they did okay. But yeah, I get you on the one hand. It would be nice to have a bit more consistency. I guess the problem is that now on that budget, they just can't do, or certainly can't do one series a year, which is, it's fine. I mean, maybe we are heading towards the point where it's every 2 years. I don't know. Who knows?
It was an interesting point I thought you brought up about like Sherlock and if Doctor Who will go into like an hour and a half specials, because I recently watched all of Sherlock after never seeing the show before. And while I was watching it, I was thinking, on one hand, it would be kind of good if Doctor Who went with this, because you'd get really long, expanded, interesting stories, with a lot of time to flesh out the plot and characters. But then on another hand, I kind of thought, well, there's only 3 episodes a series, and if you're going to do that, you kind of have to make the episodes count, and I don't really necessarily know if they would, because obviously with the 2009 specials, I think there's only a few stories in that kind of run, and I don't think all of them are necessarily great. And if you're only having 3 stories a series, you kind of need to make them all bangers, and I don't necessarily know if they would be. I think that's maybe one of my problems with Series 9, is that it's all constructed of 2-parters, which I really like that idea, because I'm a big fan of 2-parters and fleshing out the stories, but then, at least for me, I don't think all of them count. Like, I don't think every single story is amazing, and the problem is that then if you have every single story as a 2-parter, you've got half of the stories, so if not all of them are like really good, you kind of feel a bit ripped off, because you've got half the stories essentially, and
it go past quickly.
That's the problem. If they were to do more, as much as I'd really love them to do more 2-parters now, they've only got 10 episodes. So if you do like 3 2-parters, that's over half your series.
I don't know about that. I think you're right. I don't think hour and a half stories just all in one sitting could work.
Because
obviously an hour and a half is, I suppose, the equivalent to a 2-part story of 2 45-minute halves. I mean, personally, I'd say, I guess, thinking about it now, that I think where we're at the moment with the 50-minute runtime is okay, I suppose. I don't think running through the stories from the past couple of years, I don't think there are any cases where I felt this is being tied. There might have been 1 or 2 where I felt this is being tied up a bit quickly. I mean, something like Arachnids in the UK with the spiders just being defeated like that.
I'd say probably for me, Fugitive of the Jejune and Can You Hear Me? I'd say are probably 2 examples where I feel like they, especially Fugitive of the Jejune, I kind of feel,
maybe actually,
because I spoke about this with
it's so weird in that episode how the companions just disappear, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
They come back right at the end. That's very,
I feel like
bizarre.
when the 13th Doctor discovers the TARDIS and it turns around and Ruth's in the costume and she says, "Hello, I'm the Doctor," it feels like that should be the end of a first part and the cliffhanger to a second part. But it isn't, and it kind of just,
that's right.
It almost feels like the second part is kind of condensed down to 15 minutes at the end of the story. Which I guess is why I'm not the biggest fan of that story.
But you're right.
I think Can You Hear Me is maybe another one where the actual plot is kind of like 30 minutes. You've kind of got 10 minutes at the start and 10 minutes of coda at the end, and the story doesn't really feel fleshed out. I feel like the 50-minute runtime is quite weird, because on one hand, it's 5 minutes more, but then you look at Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror, that's only 47 minutes, which I believe is like the same runtime as something like Vampires of Venice. So is there really much of like a change in runtime? I think it varies, obviously.
That's an interesting point.
I think
because some of those Moffat episodes, or quite a lot of the Moffat episodes, did kind of stretch from that 45 minutes. I mean, some of them were shorter, of course, like 42 minutes or whatever, but quite a lot of them did stretch beyond 45 into 46, 7, 8. I think in Series 8, if memory serves correctly, that like obviously Deep Breath was feature length. That's a weird story, actually. That's one that's too long, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's weird when you think of like
and only that long because it had to be shown in cinemas. That was the only reason, I think, why they made it feature length.
I think that's really it's really weird because everyone goes on about how the Day of the Doctor is like feature length, and then you look at Deep Breath, and I believe it's like the same length, if not longer, which is really bizarre.
That rings about. I think. Gosh, I have to check that, but I think I remember reading that it's longer, ever so slightly, which is just mad.
Because there was so much talk about how the Day of the Doctor was longer than a usual story, and then Deep Breath just comes along and is just longer. I would agree that it's too long. I haven't watched Deep Breath in years, but from what I can remember, it's slightly too long.
Yeah, there's a lot of padding, really. Yeah, it picks up, I suppose, when they get into the restaurant, the Doctor and Clara, but before that, certainly. I mean, actually, on that point, on the point of kind of padding and stuff, that's an interesting one, because I actually found there's one episode that I went back to watch recently from Series 12, which I hadn't watched since broadcast, and I found, gosh, there's a lot of padding in this episode, actually. It's quite an acclaimed episode. It was The Haunting of Villa Diodati, which, went down really well. But when I watched it back, I felt it was a funny one, because on the one hand, there are these characters in the house, the Doctor, Ryan, Graham and Yaz, just trying to get to know them a bit, and you have things like Yaz talking to one of them about whatever it is, like enigmatic people in their lives. You have Ryan chatting to Mary Shelley about his nan, about Grace, because Grace just comes back randomly. Grace is relevant again.
And the ghosts that Graham encounters that serve no purpose in the story
which never goes anywhere. So I found when I rewatched it back, actually, that there was a lot of... I sort of felt like, especially watching it back and knowing what's coming, I felt, okay, you're just basically treading water here until Ashad arrives. Like that's what's happening here. And it comes really, considerably far into the episode. I think it might not be quite 25 minutes in, but it's certainly over 20 minutes in. And that's bonkers. But also going back to Can You Hear Me, like you say, that's an episode where I think quite consciously I thought, okay, we're going to have 10 minutes at the end to really hammer home the mental health thing and show in each of these three cases of Ryan's friend and Yaz with her suicide thing, whatever, mental health, depression, and Graham with his cancer thing. We're going to give each of them ample time, and if that means making the rest of the plot shorter, condensed into 30 minutes, then so be it. I think they decided that quite consciously. But in fact, also in that story, it's really odd with the whole Syria thing, because that's like a subplot
so which pointless. It
didn't need to be there.
It's mental that's in there. It doesn't go anywhere, and that story, it feels very, very rushed and weird elements in there, and like Zelen and I can't remember the name of the woman who's with him. They go down to that street and then just get instantly stopped by the Doctor. In a way, I'm still not sure how the Doctor stops him, but it's kind of instantly stops.
Well, like they turn the fingers, they turn their own weapons on them, I think, or something like that, which is a bit of a trope in itself. But it's interesting in the case of that story, because it is sort of kind of dripping with atmosphere, and I think Zelen is such a great villain, and the cinematography when they go down to that street is really cool. It looks gorgeous. But that is one episode where I feel overall that it doesn't quite hit the nail on the head like it might have done. I mean, perhaps controversially, I feel that quite a lot of the series 12 episodes, really. I think I find series 11 so much more consistent in the fact that it might not be more lore heavy in terms of returning stuff and continuity. It might not be more exciting, but it is pretty sure of what it wants to do, I feel like, in terms of the historical stories, in terms of the family arc thing, in terms of Graham and Ryan. And with series 12, which I rewatched recently, I felt that it's a funny one. Yeah, there are stories where the pacing feels off, like in Orphan 55 is a notorious example. And Praxius as well is a bit weird for that. I think agree. It's when they have so many plates spinning, when they do the whole extended fam thing where you have a 4-strong TARDIS team and they invite extra people in, extra guest casts, and they have these massive guest casts, which I like on the one hand because it's a nice little idea that the Doctor just picks people up and they come in the box, but it also you end up with some of them feeling a bit underdeveloped and subplots which don't really go anywhere, and characters who I don't know that didn't need to be there in the sense that the plot doesn't hinge on them. I guess it's nice that they're there, but you can forget, you could take it or leave it. In particularly in terms of that Syrian girl from Can You Hear Me?
Why is she even there?
And she's like an interesting example because she's introduced into the episode early on, but because they're dealing with all the mental health stuff in the last 10 minutes, it's like they forget to say goodbye to her. They never drop her back off home.
Yeah, there's a couple of instances of that.
It's weird when that happens.
In Praxius, where that guy dies and no one acknowledges it. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Just forget about it.
That's a classic example.
I think one of the criminal actions of a too big a guest cast is Orphan 55, because I remember being really excited going into it because I'm a big In-Betweeners fan. The James Buckley was going to be in it, and he's just barely in that story. He's really not in it at all, and you could cut him out.
There are too many characters in that story.
You could cut so many characters out, and you just forget that characters are even in that story. And
completely.
I don't get
you
why
forget who's still alive and who's died. And
exactly. I know Chipley didn't write that story, but it makes no sense to me why you'd have a big guest cast and then a big TARDIS team as well. Like, why'd you even give yourself like that challenge to try and make them all interesting and things? I think
you can certainly say that he sets himself a challenge with that. Definitely, for sure.
It always works in the Hartnell era because you've got multi-part stories and a lot of time to flesh out these characters and split them up. But in these 50-minute stories, you just don't have the time. So if he was doing multi-part stories, I think it would work. Or if you split the Doctor and the companions up, like I think one of the best instances of a guest cast is probably in Spyfall with A.J. Lovelace and Noor Inayat Khan, because they're split away from the companions, so they have kind of time to breathe and get development with those characters. And I guess even a similar thing with Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. Like, all those characters kind of feel quite developed and kind of feel like real people.
I'd agree with that,
Even, again, I can't remember her name, but Tesla's assistant, even she feels like a kind of...
Scarrett, I think it is.
Yes, she feels like a kind of developed character. And she has some nice scenes. Absolutely. You contrast that to Orphan 55 the week before, where half the characters you could just cut out of that story. Neither James Buckley or his son need to be there. I have no idea why those characters are in that story at all.
No, you're right. They they don't need to be there. It's a funny story, that one. They leave the base, the resort, only to come all the way back. It's just like a massive loop, and nothing really changes apart from people dying and just
It's funny because because I don't know whether it's because I really enjoyed Spyfall the second part so much that I remember kind of enjoying Orphan 55 at the time. Like, I went on Twitter and saw like people were hating it. I just didn't really understand it. I even think my initial review, I kind of say that, in most series you get an episode where loads of people dislike it and you kind of like it, and then on the flip side you usually get that episode where a lot of people like and you're not really a big fan of it. At least you usually get that in a series for me. And I believe I labelled it as that episode in my review. And it's weird because, it's so flawed and it's not a great story, but I think it's kind of fun to watch in a sense.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I don't think it's terrible. I don't think
it has a certain charm about it. Like, people have compared it to the 1980s stuff, like Sylvester McCoy or whatever. Because I guess, like, it's so bad that it's good. Like, you watch it sort of knowing that it's not really logical, it doesn't make much sense. But there is a certain element of that, I suppose, like kind of roller coaster ride. Oh, we're just going to watch it and have a fun time and, take the mick out of it, maybe, but we're going to have a good time watching it.
I think even when I watched it, I didn't even think it was kind of so bad it's good. I just kind of enjoyed it as a story. And I think certainly in hindsight, I've looked at it and thought, certain parts of it aren't great. Like the ending with the climate change, that certainly could have been handled better. And like you said, clumsy. Guest cast and the actual plot really makes no sense. The Benny woman is infuriating, but I don't know. I just think it's kind of enjoyable. It certainly wasn't my least favourite episode of the series. There are actually probably about 3 episodes of Series 12 I actually disliked more, which I know will kind of shock some people, but I really didn't dislike Orphan 55 that much. I just thought it was kind of middle of the road, fun kind of story, a bit like Tooth and Claw, but more flawed, if that makes sense. Maybe it would be worse if I rewatched it, because I watched it twice on broadcast, once on broadcast and another time for my review, but I haven't watched any of Series 12 actually since kind of the time that it aired, so maybe I need to give it another watch. I'm kind of working my way through the Revived series in a marathon at the moment, so I will get to it eventually. But I certainly have some controversial opinions. Like personally, I preferred Orphan 55 to Fugitive of the Jejune, Can You Hear Me, and The Timeless Children, which I know is very unpopular. Certainly, for Fugitive of the Jejune, I know a lot of people really love that episode. Personally, I think it's a bit of a mess, but everyone likes what they like. Personally, I like The Wedding of River Song more than most people, and everyone says that's a mess. So, everyone has their own little quirks, I guess, and I guess that's what makes everyone unique and makes everyone Doctor Who fans, I guess, is that the variety of different opinions, and everyone has their own hot takes. So I know you certainly
and
have
every episode has its fan. Every episode, even the worst episodes, have their fans.
And you certainly have a lot of hot takes, Richard, and I kind of wanted to get onto this because I was gonna ask you kind of who is your favourite Doctor? I think I know the answer, but that's kind of where I was going with this. But
I'd probably say Peter Capaldi, 12th Doctor.
I thought that's what you were going to say. Why is he your favourite Doctor, Richard?
Gosh, on the spot now. I don't know. I think I like it being an older guy or an older person in general. And I just think he's such a great actor with it. He does such a good job with it. And I guess I like the drama in those seasons in season 8 and 9 and 10 of kind of all the am I a good man sort of stuff and like questioning his morality and all that weird stuff and being a bit rebellious. But I don't know. I like them all. I mean, I would probably say that I like Jodie better than most, really. Certainly at the moment, just because in the thick of it, in her era, her being the incumbent at the moment, really enjoying her and being a fan of her at the moment. And
I think certainly I kind of need to wait until her era's over to really get like a judgment on her Doctor, because probably at the moment she'd be kind of low down, but that's mainly because we haven't really seen everything from her. And I think one of my big problems with Jodie was in Series 11, she kind of lacked complexity. Like, she was just kind of the happy-go-lucky Doctor all the time, and there wasn't really those dark, serious moments. And that's something I, again, appreciate Series 12 for, is I really enjoyed that kind of complex side that they gave to her Doctor, and that dark edge and what they went for that. And I certainly hope we get a lot more of that in Series 13, but...
But then again, of course, though, it was nice, I think, in hindsight, to have a Doctor who is... I mean, this is the first time we've had a Doctor who's kind of just really enthusiastic about the universe and travelling, and just really joyful and kind of mad and bonkers and enthusiastic and stuff. And that was really nice as a kind of reaction against Capaldi, I think, looking back in hindsight, between him and then this kind of breath of fresh air, ray of sunshine sort of Doctor, optimistic Doctor. I mean, there's stuff that she says and does which the 12th Doctor wouldn't dream of saying or doing.
I suppose so.
So they each have their merits, and particularly when you view them in context, I think. Yeah,
I certainly would say that sometimes I think the constant optimism got a little bit grating in Series 11, but I can certainly see the appeal to it. I just think that her constant optimism and kind of, I think particularly for me, the kind of like fam thing and her using the slang and referencing like outside things all the time kind of got a bit grating, because it kind of felt like Chibnall was kind of like trying to get the Doctor to appeal to like kids, and he was kind of like, what do kids say these days? Let's get the Doctor to say fam, because kids these days say fam. And I just find that a little bit grating. I think in Series 12 they kind of improved her Doctor and just got a Doctor that I think really brought out the acting talents of Jodie, because I think my big problem with Series 11 is there just weren't really like many scenes that really called for like great acting.
Wasn't much to get teeth bitten into. Really,
I've been rewatching Series 5, and for a debut series for Smith, he gets so much to work with.
He gets a lot.
Yeah,
he does it brilliantly. He does it so well.
And I think with Smith, by the end of Series 5, you kind of forget that this is like his first series as the Doctor.
Oh, totally.
You kind of presume it feels like he's been the Doctor for years. Even at the end of the 11th hour, you're watching it and you almost forget like this is a Doctor's debut story, because it feels like he's been doing it for years. And I always feel like with Jodie, it still felt like she was the new Doctor. And by the end of Series 11, I think she only really found her feet in Series 12. I think that's one thing also I'd probably say about Capaldi, is that this is the thing. I know you're a big fan of the Capaldi era. Me personally, I'm not the biggest fan. I think it's kind of with Capaldi himself, he feels very inconsistent in all three series. He kind of feels like three different...
That's a common criticism.
And I feel like it kind of feels like less of like a character arc and more of rigid changes due to like the fan backlash at the time. I feel like that's a problem with Moffat's era. Like we discussed earlier about Series 6 and 7 and how reactionary he became.
And consensus.
Even now, like Series 12, to me, even though I enjoyed parts of it, felt very reactionary compared to like the criticisms of Series 11 and
maybe.
Even early on with Moffat, like the Paradigm Daleks were just gone instantly, and I feel like he certainly tended to crumble to fan backlash in a way that I don't think RTD really did. I think RTD just stuck with what he wanted to do, and he did it, whereas I think Moffat changed a lot of his plans in terms of what the fans were thinking at the time. Like, after Hellbent, we never went back to Gallifrey. I don't think that's a coincidence, because a lot of people didn't like it, so he just completely tried to get you to forget about it. And like that Doctor in Series 8, there was a lot of criticism for him, so he's completely different in Series 9, and I feel like there's a lot of reactionariness in the Moffat era, which I think holds it back.
I think generally there's a massive pressure on the actors who play the Doctor and the people who write the show as well and showrun it. I mean, obviously with Jodie being the first female one and Chibnall having written that and made that decision, which maybe wasn't as prevalent, I guess, in RTD's time or in the classic era. I mean, as we said at the start, fans have always found stuff to complain about and criticize. But yeah, no, it's interesting all that kind of stuff we've been saying about how it was reactionary in Moffat's era, because I think, to go back to the whole thing about social media and people having an audience to now voice their concerns, which wasn't there before, it definitely becomes a bigger issue, and it's something which I think, it is a bit of a problem, that sort of thing. I guess it's what inevitably eventually will lead to the show being cancelled again one day, the fans getting too big for their boots and deciding what they think Doctor Who should be, and just being a nuisance, I suppose, in that sense, and not being able to make their minds up, and the show pandering to that by just changing stuff.
Yeah, you are right.
To their needs, I guess. But I don't know. It's a funny one. It definitely feels, maybe it's just because I'm older now, but it definitely feels like a more prominent thing now than when I was watching the show as a kid. But then again, I mean, the Paradigm Daleks were invented when I was a kid, so what do I know?
Well, it's weird because looking back on the Paradigm Daleks, because obviously the time I was getting into it, kind of similar to the Silence and the Weeping Angels, the Paradigm Daleks were marketed so much, and like every single thing related to Daleks in like annuals or on the website, it was all Paradigm Daleks. So it feels like they had much more of a presence than they actually did, because you go back and they're like, they only really have Victory of the Daleks, but at the time they felt like they were massive. But when you look at it,
they really marketed them,
in it,
didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. So like all over magazines and stuff and posters, and I mean, I loved the adventure game they did with them, the City of the Daleks one, because they were just all over the place there, and that was amazing to have a story where there was just like a whole population of them on this planet, or Scar, or whatever it was. But it's definitely a shame we didn't see more of those.
I think so. So there's some cool concepts they were going to try out with those, like the switching of the weapons, and what was the Eternal Dalek? No, we don't know, and we'll probably never know.
No, I don't think they've ever told us that, what they had planned for that. No, but there's definitely potential with those. Yeah, it's a shame.
Yeah, and
the fans had the backlash.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, and even to the extent, like, as much as I'd personally like the Timeless Child to go away and we never hear about it again, on the other hand, I also don't want that, because I don't want it to be so reactionary that Chibnall just changes his plans. If you get what I'm saying, as much from a fan perspective, I wasn't a fan of it, so I prefer they kind of dropped it. I also appreciate that actually I don't want them to drop it, because that just goes into the whole reactionary thing we spoke about before. And as much as I may not like it, if Chibnall wants to go down that route, just let him, because then you're falling into the reactionary trap we discussed before.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally get behind him and Jodie, not wanting to be in the public eye too much, which they've been criticised for. But I mean, after you see what happened with Moffat, and he wasn't perfect, and his stories weren't perfect, and he said and did some questionable stuff in his time. But at the same time, I mean, I think when you hear stories of like conventions and stuff, and people just ripping into him online as well in YouTube stuff and social media, as I say, it's a big issue, I think, and I suppose the only thing they can do is just ignore it, like you say, and just ignore the backlash to a certain extent. I mean, people have criticised Chibnall for saying it doesn't read reviews, and I think he probably does read bits and pieces. I mean, he clearly has an idea about the consensus to the episodes. And
a lot of fans' criticisms of Series 11 he improved on in Series 12, so he does read reviews, but I think there's a thing about taking on board criticism but not dropping it. Like, I think, like with the Paradigm Daleks, Moffat took on board criticism in terms of making them more metallic, but he also just dropped them. Whereas if he took on board small criticisms like how plasticky they looked, but still followed through his plans, I think that would still work. Like, I feel like if he takes on board criticisms of The Timeless Child, but still goes in the general direction that he wanted to take it in, I think that would be kind of the best way forward, because I think you need to take on board criticism, but also don't like just full on drop your ideas because of backlash.
Yeah, that's a tricky balance.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
We've been recording for an hour and a half now, and yeah, I did just kind of want to get into kind of like the Capaldi era, I suppose, and because obviously I've been watching your channel for a while, and I know you are a very big fan of the Capaldi era, and kind of, as I'm quite vocal in the sense that I'm not the biggest fan, particularly Series 8, kind of that. I like Series 10. I think they kind of got a good balance there, but I think particularly early on, and I guess I just kind of wanted to ask, like, what is it kind of about the Capaldi era that really makes it for you?
I don't know, really. I mean, part of it, I think, is that just when the time that it was on, like, I was in my younger teenage years, and I guess I was quite defensive, certainly more defensive about it then than I am now. I mean, I still like it now, but I'll admit it's got flaws and stuff, and like any era of Doctor Who. But when it was on, I suppose I sort of just I felt like I had a good grasp of what was going on and what it was about, I suppose. I think it is fairly consistent in terms of themes and stuff. I mean, I love what happens with the Doctor and Clara in Series 8 and in Series 9 as well. And all the good man stuff. I'm trying to think of specific things, really. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think I liked it more, as I say, when I was younger, to be honest, than I do now. I mean, I used to kind of get quite defensive about Hellbent, and I watched that story the other day, and to be honest, I thought it was a complete mess. So my opinions have changed slightly.
That's interesting, because I wasn't aware that you kind of had that kind of change of opinion towards the kind of Capaldi era. So I guess when I kind of think about the Capaldi era and you, I guess I'm kind of referencing your kind of videos of when it was on, and your kind of love for that. And I guess I never particularly noticed that kind of shift in your opinions on it, but obviously it is there, and that's interesting. I think we all look at things differently as we grow older. Like Series 7 I loved at the time, but looking back it had flaws to it, and I think everything has flaws, and I think at the time a lot of people just kind of get swept up in what's going on and loving it, and I think for me, probably why I have such a bias against the Capaldi era, it's just kind of the time I was in at the time. Kind of, although I'd gone back and watched Eccleston and Tennant and seen other Doctors, Smith to Capaldi was kind of my first live change, and I just feel that how they they handled Capaldi in Series 8, I found it very hard to like him because of Clara, and she really seemed to really dislike him, and it really made it hard for me to connect to his Doctor when your companion also doesn't seem to have connected to his Doctor throughout the series. And I think one scene that I have a massive issue with is in Deep Breath, because you have the regeneration trauma in every regeneration episode, but when they put on the costume, that's kind of supposed to be our formative moments, and kind of like the trauma's out the window, then out the Doctor, that kind of thing. And just when Clara goes into the TARDIS and sees the Doctor in his new costume, it's kind of like, there's the Doctor, and her instant response is just, I don't know who the Doctor is anymore. I feel like her dislike of that Doctor really kind of takes me out of the series. And as I said before, I don't know, it probably wasn't the intention for her dislike of the 12th Doctor throughout that series to seem like just because he's Capaldi and not Matt Smith, but that's certainly what it feels like to me, because the whole good man stuff is kind of all tied into his regeneration. Unfortunately, that it kind of gets a bit muddled, I guess.
And I think it was the intention. I think, I mean, it's interesting to hear that how you didn't kind of connect to it, perhaps. Someone watching it slightly younger than me, I suppose, and I don't know how many kids enjoyed it at the time. I think dramatically it's interesting what they did, but certainly with hindsight, I can see how perhaps it wasn't the best decision in terms of making it a bit more mainstream. I mean, I wouldn't say that makes it objectively worse, but no, I can certainly appreciate that. I mean, at the time, sometime after, I think it was the year after Series 9 aired, I did a run of videos called Defending Series 9 or something like that. And it was because I used to really, I still like Series 9, but I used to really, really, really think it was amazing. And I suppose it was sort of in a way because so many people were ripping into those seasons at the time and those episodes and the choices that were being made creatively. And I just wanted to stick up for them, I suppose, just for the sake of sticking up for them. And so, although I still do like the era, I have a very big fondness for that era now, and it's probably one of my favourite eras still. At the same time, my opinion on it has shifted slightly. Not I think it's any worse necessarily, but you definitely reinterpret things as you get older a bit, I suppose.
Absolutely. And I guess I just kind of feel that it's kind of Capaldi's debut series, and I just don't really feel like he gets a great time to kind of shine as the Doctor, because you have all that bickering between him and Clara. It's almost the same problem I have with Colin Baker in his first series with Perry, and all the bickering there. It really makes you hard. It really feels hard to kind of like that Doctor when you've got all that bickering. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm watching the Colin Baker era with me being older than obviously when I watched the Capaldi era at the time, that I feel it's almost more understandable, because Colin Baker is such an arse to Perry that you understand why she just dislikes him so much. But with Capaldi and Clara, there's a couple of scenes, like the one in Into the Dalek where he says he's on the top layer, if you want to say a couple of words, and moments like that, which you do kind of understand why she dislikes him, but I don't feel that that's kind of consistent throughout the series. It just kind of feels like to me that she just kind of dislikes him for no real reason. And as I said, as I was younger, the main thing I had to connect to her disliking the Doctor was the fact that he was Capaldi and not Smith. And because I was younger and I hadn't watched the classic series, going into Series 8, I was quite sceptical, because the Doctor is old now and I was used to young Doctors. The fact that Clara makes such a point of he's old and I dislike him because he's old and all that stuff, it did just make it really hard as I was younger to connect to Capaldi's Doctor. I think especially as I was so attached to Matt Smith, I think the fact that they kind of purposely make Capaldi's Doctor a bit harder to connect to, I think didn't really help me. And I think it was only really kind of Series 9, but especially Series 10, when I really kind of connected to his Doctor. And I think I like his Doctor a lot more on hindsight. Like, I have a lot of respect for Capaldi, and although I think the characterization was a bit whack, I think he always brought his A game to the role, and I think with better writing, I think he could have been a fantastic Doctor, at least in my opinion. But I think at the time I wasn't a big fan of his Doctor, but in hindsight, I'm still not a big fan of the era. I certainly like Capaldi a lot more. And it's kind of weird, because I'm a big fan of the Smith era, but then not a big fan of the Capaldi era. I acknowledge that that's very strange, because they're both written by Moffat, and as I said, when people say, who's better, RTD or Moffat, and which era is better, and I almost feel like, or when people say which era is the best, RTD, Moffat or Chibnall, I almost feel like there's actually kind of 4 eras, at least for me: RTD, the the Smith era, the Capaldi era, and then the Chibnall era. Because especially when I was younger, Series 8 felt so different to Series 7 in terms of like tone, and Clara felt like a completely different character to before, and they don't really feel like they're being helmed by the same man. I guess you have the odd episodes where it's like that is very obviously written by Moffat, but yeah, I guess I think a lot of my distaste towards that era is mainly down to how I felt about it at the time and the kind of impact it had on me, which I guess has kind of stayed with me. But I always find it interesting to listen to people with kind of different perspective on things, and I know that the Capaldi era has certainly had a resurgence in popularity in the fandom at the moment. There's a lot more people really spreading positivity about the Capaldi era and Capaldi himself, which I don't necessarily know if you got at the time. He's like, he is often a lot of people's favourite Doctor. He's obviously your favourite Doctor, but I see on Twitter a lot of people really like him, and I just kind of think it's interesting because I'm not sure you had so much of that at the time, and a lot of people have certainly looked back on his era differently now and a lot more positively.
And I think that will probably happen to a certain extent as well with the current era when it's finished. I mean, maybe not in the same ways, and I don't know, it's a different kettle of fish. But I think whenever that era is the current era, whenever any era is the current era, it always gets more more criticism than is necessary, really.
Yeah.
Or I guess that's the thing about fans, always finding something to complain about. But then, with hindsight, you're going to reevaluate things for the better or for the worse, I suppose.
I guess it's even you look at things like the Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy eras, and Paul McGann, and how much of a lot of people say that Colin Baker's era is underrated, despite the fact people hated it at the time, and especially Sylvester McCoy. Like, so many people would say that is actually almost going into a new golden age before it gets cancelled. But obviously, not many people were thinking that at the time. So, I certainly think a lot of people look back on things differently, and that's always a good thing. I think we can look back at things once it's over and have a different perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely as well. I can't wait until the people that were kids. I mean, I don't know if it's maybe starting to happen with the Smith era and the Capaldi era. Maybe starting to happen, but when the people that were kids when those eras were on, are kind of your age or my age now, and are making their voices heard, because you always hear people saying now, if there's a collection Blu-ray box set released, whichever season it is, it always has fans, and there's always people saying, I was so scared of this at the time, so scared of it. And so often, fans go now, this episode wasn't scary, this season wasn't scary. But there'll be kids who are watching that who thought it was scary, and maybe they've not had their voices heard yet because they're not old enough. But there are definitely generations that have loved. I mean, kids that loved the Capaldi era. I'm guessing.
Without
kids that loved the Whittaker era and still do. And I can't wait to chat to them when they're old enough to kind of analyse why that was.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's always going to be a kind of sense of nostalgia for people.
Definitely,
obviously, when I hear about a lot of people kind of criticising the later Smith years, that kind of came out of nowhere for me, because obviously I loved it so much at the time because I was younger. But then you look back on it and you think, some of that wasn't great, and I certainly think it'll be interesting to kind of hear the story from this generation of kids, like you said, that are watching the Whittaker era, to kind of hear their stories and what they think in the future. And absolutely, I think that's the great thing about Doctor Who, is that you can jump on at any different point at any age and just love it. And I think that's something kind of unique about Doctor Who, is you have so many fans that are so unique in age and race and everything, and in gender, whatever, all you have so many unique Doctor Who fans with unique stories to tell and unique opinions, and that's what makes the fandom so interesting, I guess. Kind of linking back to our how we started when we were talking about the fandom.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's what makes the Doctor Who fandom so great.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess I should probably be wrapping it up now. I think we've covered certainly a lot of bases in this podcast. We've talked about so much and some certainly interesting topics. And thank you so much for coming on, Richard. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's great to chat with you.
Yeah, it's been great. I said a similar thing to Mr. TARDIS, but obviously I'm a small channel. I don't have many subscribers, so it's so great that you kind of took the leap and decided to come on. It really means a lot to me. And
absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking about Doctor Who.
No problem whatsoever at all. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it has certainly been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Is there anything you want to plug at the end of this?
Oh, okay. Well, if anyone would like to subscribe to me, that might be nice.
Yeah.
I think if you just type in Richard Lloyd or Richard Lloyd Doctor Who on YouTube, it'll come up with my channel. And on social media like Twitter and Instagram, my handle is @StetsonDoctor.
Yeah.
I think that's about it.
Yeah, and you guys, if anyone isn't subscribed to Richard Lloyd, you should absolutely go and do so, because he makes absolutely brilliant content. So yeah, you should all go subscribe to him. But yeah, once again, just thank you for coming on Richard. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you for coming on, and thank you for any viewers who are still watching at this point. I hope you enjoyed the podcast and enjoyed me chatting to Richard. And thank you everyone for watching, and goodbye.